Nevin Cohen, and I am the chair of the Health Policy and Management Department. And we're pleased to have another in our series of research projects that our faculty are involved in. And in just a moment, Karmen will introduce herself and introduce the topic that she's speaking about. But thanks for joining us.
Karmen Williams. I have been at CUNY for about 5 years. I'm in the Health Policy and Management Department, and most of my teaching has been with the Population Health Informatics program under FE. And so I'm happy to today to talk about one of the projects that I worked with a student on, exploration of reproductive health apps, data privacy policies, and the risk posed to users. This is a qualitative content analysis. We started this project. This actually started as one of her as her capstone project, and then as we continued to dive into it, we did a little more research, and then was able to publish this last year. And so very excited to talk about it and kind of thinking about the future. Although this is published, I am presenting this in a couple of weeks. Right now, my thing doesn't want to advance. Actually, I think I'm going to turn off my video for a second. For the American Medical Informatics Association in Atlanta, I'll be moderating a workshop where we'll talk about some of this information, as well as a panelist on the role of informatics in transforming reproductive and women's healthcare. And so really, this particular topic is one that is really still very relevant, although we set out to publish this in 2023. Now, 2 years later, we're still talking about the same topic and some of the issues that are still going on surrounding this particular issue. Just briefly, some of my ongoing research, which I'm still kind of like in a lot of places, but a lot of this really goes around like health informatics and how we're using specifically health informatics tools to serve the public and to look at the population health. And so some of that includes AI in healthcare, where we're looking, just finished a scoping review where our protocol was published, and then we just published a couple weeks ago, Gender and Racial Bias Unveiled, looking at some of those clinical AI and ML algorithms that are still showing that there are a lot of health inequities out there. I've done some work with Health Information Exchange. We just recently published The Evolution of Clinical HIEs to Population Health Resources, which was a very long time coming, but happy to get that one published, and is being useful to those who are looking at how to switch from this very individual to this population level. Also, health informatics in prison systems. There's ongoing research with several students as well as staff within CUNY SPH, so health technologies for justice impacted individuals. We're doing a systematic review, which is being presented at APHA, as well as in the process of being published. Also, just published Enhancing Healthcare Accessibility Through Telehealth, really looking at the differences or an outline of how that's changed over the past few years, especially with COVID and things like that. And so I am recently diving into maternal child health and informatics and reproductive health informatics. As you see, this is one topic that we are exploring, as well as this autoimmune disease health equity hub that I'm working on. We will do a subset of that where we'll specifically focus on pregnancy. So these are some of the things I'm working on. Still open, and like I say, I'm going to present this at a conference, so I'm so open to any feedback, any thoughts, any things that you have that you'd like to let me know about this presentation and how to improve, as well as just moving to the next steps, what other research can be done in this area. Okay. So back to the topic at hand, exploration of reproductive health apps, data privacy policies, and the risk posed to users. Like I said, this is a qualitative content analysis. I do want to show you my team. That was Nina Zadus Libby, who is a CUNY SPH Population Health Informatics alum. She is currently at Rutgers Law School in her second year, I believe. And then Dr. Rizwana Bibiji, sorry. She's at Arizona State University, an assistant professor there. And so we came together and did this research and really put in some time. It took us almost a year to get this published, which is, but great team, great work. All right, just to introduce it, we understand that there are several um, health apps have, been uptake of health apps over the past several years. We know the health and fitness apps, the downloads increased from about 1 billion in 2017 to 4.2 billion in 2023. So we saw a huge increase in this. Mobile health apps, we know, collect different information. It'll ask you, if you want to, if this is okay, it'll ask you if you accept the policies that they have, but it collects identifiable data. And we understand that it could pose some privacy risks if it's not stored, if that particular data is not stored correctly. Um, Specifically in this study, we're looking at the idea that Roe versus Wade was overturned in 2022. And so we understand that, the reasons for having health apps such as monitoring and understanding different fertility and conception, contraception, sorry, tracking and things like that. And so understanding that with this overturning of Roe versus Wade, there was a lot of talk about our people, people's information and privacy for using these reproductive health apps in the United States could have been an issue. And so we understand that historically inequitable health situations, such as having access to this data, it really, this reproductive health apps can help with access to a lot of things because of the reasons they use. And so being able to be targeted and potentially criminalized based on using such an app we saw a lot of inequitable features there. I don't know if any of you saw some of the things that happened. Like there were a lot of things that came out, and this was about 2020, 2022. We saw quite a few of these. How reproductive health care struggles along the coast. We saw a lot of different changes there. Mapping abortion criminalization, a lot of those things came out. And so there was this widespread thought that using reproductive health apps, you would be able that you would be able to be criminalized, or they could charge you if anything like that happens. If they were able to find out that you went across state lines and participated in abortion or anything like that. And so because the ruling of Roe versus Wade was overturned, we understood that there was a potential of these things to be used against people, their tracking. And so it was a lot of widespread information going out there, potentially misinformation. So just a lot of things. So we, in this particular study, wanted to see, we wanted to evaluate. So we started this journey, like I say, in 2023, which was almost a year after the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And so kind of using that lens, we wanted to evaluate popular reproductive health apps and then their prospective data privacy policies. And so what was actually being shared, what were some of the different things, how do they store their data? We wanted to look at different things like that. We also wanted to compare the data privacy laws governing these apps, both in the United States and in the European Union. And then from our research with that, we want to recommend best practices for users, app developers to ensure user data safety. And so looking at some of those things and then coming up with some things that we thought would be helpful, and specifically for users. We understand there's lots of studies out there that where people, especially with health things and privacy things, we want the privacy, but when those privacy policies come up and they have all this legal jargon, we are more apt just to say we accept, accept all, instead of reading through and making sure these are things that we agree with. So, although this is objective 2, I'm going to start with objective 2 first. I'm going to compare these data privacy laws, which govern reproductive health apps. And again, I state this was in 2023 that we started this journey. But unfortunately, many of these, much of this has not changed. So although there are currently no comprehensive federal laws that govern privacy in the United States, specific to this area. There are certain cases, proceedings that we've kind of looked through, like the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA. We're aware that the privacy rule. There's also the Fourth Amendment, the Food and Drug Administration monitoring of medical devices, and the Federal Trade Commission. They do aim to protect individual privacy and medical records that are associated with PHI and identifiable health information. So this is great that we have like a basis of this is already being protected because it is protected health information. However, it's been a little unclear of how far this extends for mobile health apps, even for internet resources. So is any of this covered? It should be covered because it's still health information. But how far does that go? So you can see there's quite a few regulations, and I will also share this particular slide if anybody wants to look deeper into this and looking at some of the brief descriptions. I'll even share a link to the paper. Within this, within the paper, we describe kind of some of the gaps here, and so I'll go over a full one. That was for the United States. Even in the European Union, there is their general data protection regulation, which they have. The most effective one is I shouldn't say effective, the one in place now is 2016, which has been updated along the years. And so we understand that these are the two policies that kind of are like the most closely addressed issues related to sharing of reproductive health data via reproductive health apps are the Fourth Amendment. It really closes the legal loophole that allows data brokers to sell Americans' personal health information to law enforcement and intelligence agencies without any court oversight. And so that is one thing. And then also an act that's been introduced but has not yet been passed, the My Body, My Data Act. It establishes certain protections and certain things personally for reproductive or sexual health information. So this includes past, present, future surgeries, procedures, and especially such as termination of pregnancy. And so, like again, this is not passed. There has been a similar act passed in Washington. And it was just My Health, My Data, I think is what it's called. And it does have some of this types of protections in there as well. Okay. So going back to one, we wanted to evaluate the popular reproductive health apps and their respective data privacy policies. With this, we did basically a search to see what are the most popular health apps. And we did that on several different platforms. We did that on Google. We looked in the literature, did a couple of different things to come up with what are those 4 apps that we want to actually look at. With this, we were able to find the most popular were Clue, Flow, Period Tracker by GP Apps, and then Stardust. We downloaded these. We did our analysis from January to July of 2023. Of course, as you would imagine, a lot of this we looked at it in January. We went through it, and then again in July. And so seeing some of those changes, updating some things, just so we had the most up-to-date data on there. With this, we wanted to conduct a thesis evaluation on this, and this tool is an informatics tool that is being used. There are 6 domains which make up the thesis statement, and I think even though it's spelled with the I, it is the U. I'm not sure why, but that's what it is. Transparency, health content, excellent technical content. We want to focus, of course, on security and privacy. But there was also domains such as usability and subjectivity. Then, as I stated, we looked at the privacy policies and user agreements, and then privacy laws governing apps in the US. And so kind of in the EU, kind of looking at those in relation to who developed the app, what were some of their governing things that they had to take into place and things like that. So our overall, sorry, I know this is a little tiny. Some of the things we want to look at, so what we did, I'm going to start on the right side of this particular slide. We determined those mobile apps we want to analyze based on their popularity and the country of origin. So those four, we downloaded those both on the Apple Store and on the Google Play Store. So Nina had an Apple, she did it, and then I have an Android, and so I looked it up on Google Play Store. We want to see what were some of the features, and so going through this, comparing our notes, looking at who had sign-in information, login information, what did you need, who asked for what, and so like Stardust, I asked for different things like you had the option to hide your email or use a fake name, but it did require phone password to sign up. Or like Clue, you had to have your email, name, age, all of those things, date of birth, all of that was in there. You could link it to your Facebook and other things like that. And then the same with Flow and Curious Tracker. You could see there were like email and then you could phone number, different basic information that was in there. We did find, and this is saying the results a little early, but finding it interesting that only one app allowed you to not actually have to use your name for this. And so this made it a little less, made it, I guess if you were to use a fake name, it did make it a little bit more challenging to be tracked down. Okay, so we looked at different options. You had optional selections for reasons of using the app. That you could put that option if you wanted to. You could request different from the App Store. You could request location tracking. You could put that on. You could take it off, and things like that. And so potentially unnecessary data was collected. We were concerned about that. And then we looked at the terms and conditions of different privacy policies for the respective apps, and then their agreement checkbox. And so looking at what were we actually agreeing to, really looking through those policies, going through those and seeing. And then all of them had you confirm the account creation through email. So a link was sent to confirm the identification of the user, and then you were redirected to the app. So on the left side of this, what we found, this was just some of the information specifically for Clue and Flow. I didn't put the other two up here, but looking at the difference in Apple Store versus Google Play Store. So like Apple Store had, of course, country of origin. It had some different, the price, all of them were free. But even some things like the release date, which we see Google Play had some of those more up-to-date things. How many people have downloaded? I don't know why in July that wasn't available in app, but on the Apple Store, but it was available on Google. Even the rating with user ratings and things like that. And so even in-app purchases, the age content is important. We see that with Apple, it does say it's 12 plus versus with Google, it just says everyone. And so looking at these different, what was available just specifically on the Apple, on the stores for the app. Okay. So using this information, so pulling in this data, we wanted to do this thesis evaluation. And so with this thesis evaluation, it's a rating scale. So you have 1 is the lowest and 5 is the highest. So as I discussed, there were 6 domains. And so we specifically focused on the security and privacy domain. With this, so 2 reviewers, I do want to point out this was subjective reviewing based on what we thought worked well within this particular rating system. It was systematic. And one thing we did was we weighted data sharing a little bit heavier in our particular evaluation because we're looking at that specifically. How vulnerable are these apps for that particular thing? With this, this particular domain, we have protection against theft and viruses. We had authentication, data sharing, maintenance, signaling of breaches, and anonymization. And so with this particular thing, we rated how much do we think from 1 to 5, this particular app focuses on these things, or how do they rate on these things? What helped us with that rating was this why not -1 and the why not +1. With the why not -1 column, it indicates why points were not deducted from the app score. whereas a plus one, it's an indication of why points were deducted from the final score. And so basically like the pros and cons of a particular that particular um, piece of information that we're looking at, the subcategory. And so with that, we were able to, I'll show you an example in just a second. First, we looked at, based on the results, so Flow and Clue were both EU apps, which we rated about 3.5 out of 5. And that's because we were seeing very high numbers in maintenance. They're doing good with the maintenance, looking at different things like why they're, how often do they get updated? How is the protection against different things that come up? We're looking at authentication. And so looking at, is the authentication procedure, is that optimal? Are we seeing that users' experience is based on receiving like email messages? How are they being contacted? Is it protected? Is it password protected? Things like that. Signaling of breaches. Are we looking at things? Do breaches occur? How do users know? How are they notified when that happens? And we found some of this in those privacy policies. And then we found it was a little bit lower on the data sharing. And so understanding that when data is shared, who's it being shared with? And I'll share a little bit more how we got there with our rating as well. And then even with the US-based apps, we saw that our Period Tracker by GP app, we gave that about a 2. It was, we saw good authentication with that, with the alerting and the password protection and things like that. But then a lot of the other categories were pretty low on whether they were, how they protected the particular user. For Stardust, we did find it to be one of the better apps. But we saw with all of them some major concerns regarding privacy and data security, really primarily with apps, IP address tracking, and then involvement of third parties for advertising and marketing purpose. And so a lot of the policies did not specifically state, this is what we're going to use this for. But then we saw that they were actually using it for some of these. So potential misuse of data we found with all the apps, unfortunately. I want to give you an example of the thesis, probably slightly out of order, but of how we looked at this. And so with Flow, some of the examples, this was our rating score. We basically averaged our scores, what we thought they were, based on our 2 different apps that we had access to. 2 different platforms, so Apple Store or Apple and Android. And so looking at some of these things, for example, because we were looking at data sharing so heavily, we understood that this was not a bad app because it stated that data is not sold to other companies. Goodness. It's linked to other apps, which could make it easier for that flow, especially with going to doctors, using it for doctor's visits, things like that. It was an emphasis on sharing rather than selling, and then it stored data with using encryption. So great things. However, we did find some contradictions about security of data and encryption. And so although it stated these things in its privacy policy, then you might go, and I'll show you how even in the App Store, sometimes there were discrepancies which said it wasn't sharing, but then like in the App Store, it would say, we're sharing these things, And so having some of those discrepancies is why this one particularly got a little bit of a lower score in data sharing. But you see some of the ways like maintenance, it's updated almost every week. And so these kind of things are helpful. They're looking at these things to keep it going. And then in one more example, Stardust, which we looked at, which we gave a pretty high rating. And so with their authentication, like the email verification, it uses a very privacy-first authentication platform. And so having these in place, we saw that as a wonderful thing, gave that a pretty high rating. This also has good maintenance, update every week. And even their I don't want to say that word, but anonymization, they have the end-to-end encryption, which is only accessible to users. And so it does not track or use IP addresses. The government info is not linked to specific users. So if they are asked to share data by the government, it's aggregated. And then you're not required to use your legal name. And so we saw this as great things to be used for as a reproductive health app based on some of these things. And I'll give a little more of an overview of the findings too. Um, Here we have the 4 different reproductive health apps and how we're looking at these specific things. When we looked through their policies, some of the things we were concerned about, some of the things we looked at. So, for example, Clue, some of our concerns, you can see the things that they collect, um, and not collected like users. I was talking about age earlier, and so thinking about the ages of who is on these apps and if their information gets out there, and then we're thinking about definitely like minor health information being available. And so, although it collects, we did see there were some potential concerns. They do have third party sharing. There is an option to opt out of that, which is great. But it clearly states that data are shared with third parties. Um, Although it says they do not use the collected information for anything but clue efficiency. And so um, we see that it could be easier for the government agencies to obtain this information from said third parties rather than the app itself. And so we see that HTTP is vulnerable to attacks and things like that. Although they use the HTTPS protocol for encryption, we did see that there was potentially some privacy breaches that could happen there. And then even with Flow, they use the Amazon encryption service, and so there is potential. They give you the option with the data sharing there, with the third-party data sharing. You can opt out of that one as well. And some of our potential concerns were that although the privacy policy states the data is not shared with third party, we do see Outliers does share data with advertising networks such as Facebook. And so this app also uses data processing service that collect user personal data. And so what we're finding is that you're seeing these contradictions, that it's listing these things, but then it's still showing those discrepancies within their policies. Here's another example, as I mentioned earlier, with the App Store discrepancy. So we see that, so it's mentioned that we won't share your data, but then we see data linked to you. Your contact information is available. The App Store is telling us with this particular app, which may not, I don't know, that may not bother anybody or anything like that, but being aware is the biggest thing. We just, we should know that the app is saying one thing versus what is actually being done in some cases. This one, not so bad, Stardust, which we rated pretty highly. With Flow, and just a side note, we did take a little while to think, do we want to actually put the names of the apps? We pulled back a little bit thinking maybe we didn't, and some of the apps actually have reached out to us about this research. So we were sharing that it basically is, we want to share that all of them are good. They have some good things in them, but there are some discrepancies that we think should be addressed. And so even with this one, so Flow, although they say different things that won't be used in the actual Apple Store, it shows that these are the data used to track you, such as your purchases, your identifiers, your location, your usage data, what you're using it for, and then other data that's linked to you. You can see like there's some sensitive information that's being linked. Your search history, your location again. So different things like this, which we're saying they're not, with Flow, they were saying they're not going to use this information necessarily for anything, but we are seeing that it is a lot of information that is being collected. Let's see. Okay, so for our third objective, we wanted to look at some of these recommendations for best practices after taking this time to really look through these policies, look through some of the regulations around health apps and their privacy and data, things like that. We wanted to see what were some of the recommendations in the literature, what were some of the recommendations we have based on what these particular things say. And so for the main, I've said a lot of this already, but really prioritizing the access to and reading, making it easy to read these privacy policies. And so developers should really consider what are some of the things that would make it easier. And this is an issue overall. I know there are quite a few people doing research on health literacy and how can we make these particular things a little bit easier. We are not all trained in legal, legal matters and reading, although now Nina is, but how can we make this a little more user friendly for people to understand exactly what they are signing up for? And even in the evaluation of previously enacted policies, understanding those and understanding how we can adapt this. So if something were to unfortunately go down, how can we say, well, we are protected by this particular regulation? And so having these, definitely in a world of technology where things are changing daily, now AI, how do we even begin to govern these things to where they protect the user? And so a lot of different we have a lot to go with that, even thinking about how to begin to do that. And so do these particular regulations, do they cover, mHealth? Do they cover things that would basically protect users? I don't know. Right now it's a little bit up in the air, but we can say that protected health information is covered, or health information is protected. And then users should be encouraged to make educated decisions. So when they're looking at these reproductive health apps, look at the personal tracking, look at monitoring, make sure they're looking specifically for the management of data collection, where it goes, what are the risks if this gets out. There are a couple of apps that did mention that this would be a risk. Here's the risk, and this is what would happen if your data, if there's a breach. I didn't point that out earlier, but if there is a breach, this is what would happen if that breach happens, and this is what we will do to let you know. This is what we will do to minimize any risk with that breach. So different things like that. So having that, knowing exactly what apps plan to do, and then if they don't, even contacting them and saying, I am concerned about this. What is your policy for this? Things like that. So being an active user in these particular, especially with this such sensitive information. And then also our like golden rule that we kind of came to was having this end-to-end encryption and data anonymization methods. So they should be used to protect the reproductive health data. So users have provided to the apps, but also the data collected by the apps themselves. And so this includes like the IDs and the IP addresses. So having this encryption in place that it really protects the user and the app, using the app itself. And so having this available, and even I'll add one more that I mentioned earlier, having the ability to give aggregated data instead of personal, links to people's personal information, like their IP addresses and things like that. So in conclusion, we want to focus, as I think I'm just kind of reiterating the same kind of thing, but reproductive health apps, we see that they lack some transparency about their privacy policies, although they're saying very generally in a lot of cases, we do protect the user privacy, but we see there is a lack of this robust security measures to protect user-sensitive data. And then despite having stricter privacy laws in the EU, there are still some concerns that persist over IP tracking, third-party data sharing, and potential misuse of personal health information. And then encryption, I talked about that. We do need developers really to think about upholding these high privacy standards to maintain user trust and ensure data security, and definitely thinking about the encryption and reducing IP tracking. And in a lot of the cases, as I talked at the beginning, the concern was that if these prosecutors could get a hold of where people accessed these reproductive health apps before they decided to go into a clinic across state, or they could see when they cross state lines, things like that, this would be dangerous to people because it would be, potentially a violation of their privacy their health information being used in a way it was not um, supposed to be used. So I do have, and I'm happy to share this, I do have some references that what I use. I'm open to any questions and comments, and thank you. And there also is the access to our particular app. I mean, our paper, sorry.
Thank you, Carmen. Um, if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand. I don't see any questions in the chat.
Oh, I think they said I was a bit muffled. Sorry, I didn't see that before.
Yeah, I don't see- Never?
Thank you, thank you. I'm gonna look at this.
Hi, Carmen. This is great. Thank you for presenting this really important work. I was curious if you could talk about like AI integration with these apps and how that might change some of these issues about privacy and security.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is. I don't know. I haven't seen any literature on that thus far. I think that would be a great research topic, actually. But I'm not sure. Actually, I think this because it's already in a place where it's a little vulnerable. I think some of the fear I think in the has died down, but I think something like AI could could exasperate it again a little bit. Thinking about because we have AI and it's using all the information that's out there, it could potentially be another risk. Now, I guess, and Nevin, you can help me out a little bit with this, but with AI, it won't specifically provide any specific information like personal information. I would say it would be more of an aggregated thing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah. And I was thinking, and not so much sort of the models learning from your personal information, but even what we're seeing articles about right now, um, people using AI for really intimate conversations about their life, um,
Hmm.
you know, mental health advice and other really sensitive pieces of information. And at the same time, the AI companies are trying to figure out ways to monetize their models. And I worry that um, there'll be an attempt to connect, intimate discussions about reproductive health with, um,
Hmm.
you know, uh, clinical services or medical services that might help to sort of monetize the AI app, but at the same time result in information disclosure.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I think well, and that's health apps. I mean, like you're saying, a lot of them are looking at. They're already. I don't know why I would say that. Like already in it for the money. I shouldn't say that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that is as a business that is a major concern, and so and similarly with AI, and so yeah, there are some major concerns that I think we still need to dive in and figure out how they really will affect the people that are using it
Yeah, maybe future research.
for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you
Okay.
all. Let's see. Go ahead.
You don't have any other questions. I don't see any. There's no other questions. Does anyone have any other questions? Comments? Matt?
Yes. Hi, Carmen. Thanks so much for this really great presentation. Learned quite a bit about this, and obviously an incredibly important and timely topic. I guess like kind of a question about like things whether to consider, and then kind of a broader comment about other work that's being done. Did you look at all? Maybe I just missed this, but did you look at all about how this is almost like a snapshot, right? Because it's not only just that
Hmm.
the app landscape is changing with new apps coming on, but the apps themselves, as you noted, kind of are constantly being updated. And
Yeah,
so I guess like did you look at all about or think through it all about, when an app is updated sometimes, the permissions on your cell phone will, you'll have to like update your permissions on your cell phone. So it's not just, it's like not just being educated when you install the app, it's almost a constant stream of education, I guess is one thing. And then secondly, within the terms of service and the privacy policies, what happens to the data when a company gets sold to another company, whether or not those same data protections are still going to be kind of relevant in once the data is sold. So I guess that's kind of a question, whether or not you've considered those kinds of things because it's such a complex topic.
it is. Yeah, I was like, you all are bringing up great follow-ups. So no, the most we saw was, because we did a look in January and then again in July. Um, we did see some updates, and we made some adjustments to the paper, but most of those were just about what was mentioned in the privacy policy, not necessarily so much about what what I'm trying to say. Like, we saw what was changed, but unfortunately it wasn't so much that it's more like we recognize that this is a potentially, a issue. So here's more information about what we do. But then we still saw some of those discrepancies about, yeah, we won't give this to the government, but we also will still share if they ask, or something like that. And then in terms of your question about what happens when the app gets sold, that I'm not really sure about. I didn't run into any information about that. And as far as like, I know there are some regulations that say, privacy policies have to be updated. The users have to be aware of those updates. But again, I mean, it could be little things that are in there, and we just put accept all. And so some of that is, on the user to look at that a little more deeply. Um, but yeah, also how can we make that a little more user friendly? So not 100% sure, Matt, on what happens when that happens, but I think we as users should be a little more informed about all of those things. And none of the apps that we saw thus far had any information about that either.
Great. Thank you. And just for you, in case you haven't run across it, and I guess for everybody on the call, if you've not seen the work of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, they produce quite a bit of good material, plus a lot of advocacy. But they do have a lot of good, for lack of a better word, kind of consumer-facing, public-facing information about app security. And they've done quite a bit of work with for cell phone use basically for individuals seeking an abortion. So that's it's a pretty good resource too.
Sorry, tell me that again. What was that?
It's the Frontier Foundation. It's a privacy advocacy group. They do a lot of legal work, but in addition to all of that, they produce a lot of kind of public facing how tos and guidelines
Mhm.
for that. I'll post a link in for
Okay,
their a fairly recent security and privacy brief on individuals seeking an abortion.
awesome. Thank you. Looks like someone else did it too. Appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you, Meredith, for the app. I'm interested in looking at, someone else suggested that one. We were going to look at that as well. And thank you, Lori, for the article. Yeah, I think that was our concern about using that information out loud. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And like I stated, we did get a letter from a couple of apps about this particular work. So yeah.
Okay. It doesn't look like we have any more questions.
Yeah.
Hold on one second. Okay. So if no one else has any questions, that'll wrap up this session. Thank you all for joining. Thanks,
Thank you.
Carmen.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.